Commander Vorthak pressed his 3 clawed digits against his temple, feeling the familiar throb of an approaching headache. The massive reptilian officer stood 8 feet tall, his scaled hide bearing the ceremonial scars of a dozen victorious campaigns. Yet here he was, reduced to babysitting duty at the Galactic Military Academy on Nexus Prime. "Attention, cadets!" His voice boomed across the training facility, causing several young aliens to flinch. The assembled group represented 17 different species from across the galaxy. There were the insectoid Kitari, with their compound eyes gleaming, the gaseous Nephori, floating in their containment suits, and the crystalline Voltani, whose bodies chimed softly when they moved. And then there was the human. Marcus Fletcher sat in the back row, looking supremely unimpressed. His species had only joined the Galactic Federation 3 cycles ago, and their reputation preceded them. Humans were notorious for their creativity, which, in military terms, usually meant unpredictable and potentially dangerous. "Today's exercise," Vorthak continued, his yellow eyes scanning the room, "is weapon improvisation. You will each demonstrate your ability to create an effective weapon using only materials found in this training room." A Kitari cadet raised one of her 6 arms. "Commander, what qualifies as effective?" "Something that can neutralize a target at range," Vorthak replied curtly. "You have 1 standard hour." Just one thing before we begin. YouTube tells me 94.3% of you watching aren't subscribed. Subscribing is free. It really supports the channel, and you'll get more amazing HFY sci-fi stories delivered straight to you. Don't miss out. The cadets scattered throughout the room like startled prey animals. The facility was sparse by design. Basic furniture, training equipment, and cleaning supplies. Nothing obviously weapon-like, which was exactly the point. Vorthak settled into his observation chair, datapad ready to record each cadet's performance. This would be routine. The Kitari would probably fashion some sort of projectile launcher using their natural adhesive secretions. The Voltani might create a sonic weapon from their crystalline structure. The Nephori. Well, they'd find a way to turn their corrosive gases into something unpleasant. But the human? Vorthak's gaze drifted to Marcus, who was currently examining a training desk with the intensity of someone decoding ancient hieroglyphs. "Interesting," Marcus muttered, running his fingers along the desk's edge. He flipped it over, studying the metal frame underneath. Then, without warning, he began dismantling it. "What are you doing?" squeaked Zelinia, a small, feline-like Falari cadet working nearby. Marcus glanced up, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Oh, just some light furniture surgery. Don't mind me." Within minutes, he had completely disassembled not 1, but 3 desks. Metal frames, wooden tops, screws, bolts, everything laid out in neat piles like he was preparing for the galaxy's most violent yard sale. Vorthak's first eye twitched. Destruction of Academy property wasn't technically against the rules, but it certainly wasn't encouraged. "Either Cadet Fletcher," the commander called out, "perhaps you could explain your strategy?" Marcus looked up from where he was now attacking a chair, with what appeared to be a makeshift screwdriver fashioned from desk components. "Strategy? Oh, I'm making a bow." Silence fell across the training room. Even the Nephori stopped their gaseous swirling. "A bow?" Vorthak repeated slowly. "You know, bow and arrow? Ancient projectile weapon? Shoots pointy sticks really fast?" Marcus's tone suggested he was explaining quantum physics to a particularly slow child. Cadet Jex, a massive rock-like granitoid, rumbled in what passed for laughter among his species. "Human! That is primitive weapon from your Stone Age, yes? We study plasma rifles and particle beams. You make stick thrower? Marcus paused in his work, fixing Jex with a look that would have made a seasoned warrior nervous. "Oh, you mean those plasma rifles that require power cells? And particle beams that need quantum stabilizers? How are those working out for you in a room full of desks and cleaning supplies?" Jex's rocky expression shifted to something resembling embarrassment. "Right then," Marcus continued cheerfully, returning to his work. "Back to my stick thrower." Vorthak watched in growing fascination as the human continued his demolition project. Marcus had moved on to disassembling wall-mounted equipment brackets, his movements precise and purposeful. There was something almost surgical about the way he selected each component. "This is madness," whispered Corvani, a tall, ethereal being whose species communicated primarily through telepathy. "He's destroying everything." "No," said Vorthak quietly, realization dawning. "He's harvesting." Time passed. Other cadets began presenting their creations. Zilinia had crafted a sling using fabric from the cleaning supplies and metal washers as projectiles. Not bad. Efficient, simple, effective within limitations. Jex had managed to create something that looked like a rock-throwing catapult, though it seemed more likely to injure the operator than any target. Still, points for effort. The Voltani cadet, Harmony of Seven Tones, had actually managed to create a viable sonic disruptor using her crystalline body structure and some creative acoustics. Impressive, if limited by her own physical capabilities. But all eyes kept drifting back to Marcus, who had constructed what could only be described as a masterpiece of improvised engineering. The bow stood nearly 6 feet tall, crafted from the curved metal supports of multiple chair backs that had been somehow joined and reinforced. The string appeared to be braided from dozens of thin wires salvaged from various electronic components, twisted together into a cord that gleamed under the facility's lights. "Cadet Fletcher," Vorthak called out, "present your weapon." Marcus stood, hefting his creation with obvious satisfaction. The bow was clearly heavier than traditional wooden versions, but the human handled it with easy confidence. "Right, so this beauty is constructed from grade 7 Durasteel chair frames, reinforced at stress points with bracket joints and secured with salvaged fasteners. The string is multi-strand copper wire, with a polymer coating for flexibility and durability." He paused, then grinned. "And for ammunition." Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out what appeared to be a perfectly straight, sharp-pointed projectile about 18 inches long. "Is that?" Vorthak began. "A table leg, yes. Well, part of one. Amazing what you can do with a bit of metal grinding and some creative sharpening." Marcus tested the point against his finger, drawing a small bead of red blood. "Sharp enough to punch through most light armor, I'd say." Several cadets took involuntary steps backward. "But Commander," protested Zilinia, "surely range and accuracy are limited with such a primitive." Her words were cut short as Marcus smoothly knocked the improvised arrow, drew the heavy string back to his ear, and released it in one fluid motion. The projectile flew across the training room with a sharp whistling sound, striking a target dummy at the far end with tremendous force. The metal point buried itself completely through the practice target's torso and embedded itself in the reinforced wall behind it. The training room fell completely silent except for the gentle vibration of the arrow shaft. "Range approximately 150 meters, Marcus said conversationally, as if he hadn't just demonstrated a weapon that could punch through military-grade practice equipment. "Accuracy dependent on operator skill, which admittedly takes years to develop properly. But the ammunition is completely silent, reusable if you can retrieve it, and can be manufactured from virtually any rigid material." Vorthak stared at the still quivering arrow shaft protruding from his reinforced training wall. That wall was designed to stop plasma blasts. The draw weight on this particular model is approximately 200 pounds, Marcus continued, seemingly oblivious to the shocked stares around him. A bit heavy for most species, but humans have excellent upper body strength for our size. Occupational hazard of evolving on a high-gravity death world, I suppose. Death world? Squeaked one of the smaller cadets. Oh yes, Earth's rather hostile. We call it home, but most Galactic Federation species classify it as barely habitable. Something about the predators, weather patterns, geological instability, atmospheric composition. Marcus waved a hand dismissively. We're used to it. Commander Vorthak slowly stood from his observation chair. His military mind was racing, calculating implications. The human had just created a weapon system that was silent, required no external power source, used completely improvised ammunition, and could apparently punch through modern defensive materials. Using furniture. Cadet Fletcher, he said carefully, how long did it take you to learn this skill? Marcus scratched his head thoughtfully. Well, I started when I was about 12. My grandfather taught me. He learned from his grandfather, who learned from his grandfather, and so on. It's a fairly common hobby on Earth. Hobby? Vorthak repeated flatly. Oh yes, we have competitions, hunting seasons, target ranges. Some people collect antique bows. Others prefer modern compound designs with mechanical advantages. There's quite a community around it. The commander's second eye began twitching. And all humans know this skill? Heavens no. Marcus laughed. I'd say maybe 1 in 50 humans has any real proficiency with archery. Most prefer more modern weapons for practical applications. Though I suppose in a pinch, anyone with basic knowledge could throw something together. He gestured at his improvised bow. Wouldn't be as pretty as this one, mind you. Vorthak's third eye started twitching. 1 in 50 humans. That meant there were approximately 400 million humans in the galaxy who could potentially do what he had just witnessed. The interesting thing about bows, Marcus continued, apparently enjoying his impromptu lecture, is that they're essentially a mechanical energy storage device. You put energy in by drawing the string, and the limbs store that energy until release. Very efficient system. Humans have been refining the design for thousands of years. Thousands? This from Harmony of Seven Tones, whose crystalline structure was chiming nervously. Oh yes, we've found examples dating back at least 20,000 years. Probably older, but organic materials don't preserve well. The physics haven't changed though. Bent stick, string, pointy projectile. Simple, elegant, effective. Vorthak sat back down heavily. His species had been using energy weapons for over 2 millennia, completely forgetting the principles behind kinetic projectiles. Yet here was a human who had just demonstrated that sometimes the old ways were not only still viable, but potentially superior in certain situations. Questions, called out Jex suddenly. Human weapon requires great strength, yes? Not all species can use question mark. Marcus nodded. True, this particular design is built for human physiology, but the principle scales. You could build smaller bows for species with less strength, or larger ones for species with more. The granitoids, for example. He looked thoughtfully at Jex. With your natural rock composition and strength, you could probably handle a bow with twice this draw weight. Jex's rocky features shifted into what might have been interest. The real advantage, Marcus continued, warming to his subject, is the complete independence from technological infrastructure. No power cells to run down, no complex mechanisms to malfunction, No electronic signatures to detect, just mechanical physics. But surely, interjected Corvani, modern, defensive systems would easily stop such primitive projectiles. Marcus's smile became slightly predatory. Well, that depends on what you're shooting, doesn't it? This arrow is just sharpened metal, but you could use different materials: explosive tips, armor-piercing cores, chemical payloads. He shrugged. On Earth, we've developed arrows for every conceivable purpose. Vorthak's headache was getting worse. He was beginning to understand why humans had such an unsettling reputation in military circles. Time, he announced, though there were still 20 minutes remaining in the exercise. He needed to end this before the human gave the other cadets any more ideas. Very well, cadets. Present your final assessments. The presentations that followed were almost anticlimactic. Each cadet had created something functional within their species' capabilities, but nothing approached the elegance or effectiveness of the human's solution. When it came time for Marcus's formal presentation, he simply stood and repeated his earlier demonstration. This time, he aimed for a different target dummy and managed to punch the arrow completely through both the front and back armor plating. "Any questions?" he asked cheerfully. Zilinia raised a tentative paw. "Marcus, how many other primitive weapons do humans remember how to make?" Marcus's eyes lit up with enthusiasm that made Vorthak deeply nervous. "Oh, quite a few. Spears, axes, swords, crossbows, slings, staff weapons, polearms, shields." He began counting on his fingers. "Catapults, trebuchets, ballistae for siege work, clubs, maces, flails for close combat, throwing knives, javelins, boomerangs for ranged work." "Stop," Vorthak commanded weakly. "And that's just the basic categories," Marcus continued, completely ignoring the commander's distress. "Each type has dozens of variations developed for specific purposes or regional preferences. The sword alone has probably over 100 distinct designs across Earth's cultures." Several cadets were taking notes. Vorthak made a mental note to confiscate those data pads before anyone left the facility. "Of course," Marcus added thoughtfully, "those are just the weapons we remember and practice recreationally. Military archaeologists are always discovering new examples. Human warfare has been quite thorough throughout our history." "Class dismissed," Vorthak announced abruptly. As the cadets filed out, chattering excitedly among themselves, Vorthak remained seated. He stared at the two arrow shafts protruding from his reinforced training wall, trying to process what he had just witnessed. The human lingered, carefully disassembling his improvised bow and sorting the components into neat piles. "Cadet Fletcher," Vorthak called out. "Yes, Commander?" "In your honest assessment, how effective would such weapons be against modern military forces?" Marcus paused in his work, considering the question seriously. "Well, that would depend entirely on circumstances. In a direct confrontation with prepared forces using energy shields and powered armor, probably not very effective at all." Vorthak felt a moment of relief. "But," Marcus continued, "in guerrilla warfare, covert operations, situations where stealth and silence were paramount, or scenarios where enemy forces weren't expecting primitive kinetic weapons," he shrugged, "could be quite devastating, actually." The relief evaporated. "The thing about energy weapons is that they're predictable," Marcus explained. "They have specific signatures, power requirements, range limitations. Military tacticians train to counter them. But a human with a bow? Marcus smiled that predatory smile again. That's not in any tactical manual. Vorthak's all three eyes were now twitching in unison. Cadet Fletcher, I think perhaps we should schedule some additional discussions about human military history. I'd be delighted, Commander. Fair warning, though, It's quite extensive. We've been fighting wars for roughly 10,000 years of recorded history. Probably longer, but you know how it is with primitive record-keeping. As Marcus finished packing up his components and headed for the exit, Vorthak heard him humming some sort of melody under his breath. It sounded almost cheerful. The commander remained alone in the training room, staring at those arrow shafts. Somewhere in the back of his military mind, a very uncomfortable thought was forming. If humans could improvise weapons like this from furniture, what could they do with actual military resources? He decided that was definitely a question for another day, preferably a day when he had access to stronger pain medication. Commander Vorthak stood slowly, his massive frame casting long shadows across the training room. As he walked past the damaged target dummies, he made another mental note to request a budget increase for facility repairs. Something told him he was going to need it. 3 days later, Vorthak wished he had called in sick. The incident report from Marcus Fletcher's furniture archery demonstration had somehow found its way to General Thrax, the Academy's supreme commander. And General Thrax, being the sort of military leader who thrived on tactical innovation, had made a decision that would haunt Vorthak's nightmares for cycles to come. He had invited more humans. "Commander Vorthak!" The general's voice boomed across the administrative complex as his massive bulk approached. General Thrax belonged to the Urgathi species, 12 feet of armored hide, 4 arms, and a disposition that made battlefield predators seem cuddly by comparison. "Excellent work with the Fletcher demonstration. Most illuminating." Vorthak's stomach dropped somewhere around his ankles. "General, I'm not sure I understand." The Federation Council is fascinated by this human approach to improvised weaponry. They've requested a full tactical assessment. Thrax's 4 eyes gleamed with predatory interest. "I've arranged for additional human consultants to arrive today." "Additional consultants?" Vorthak's voice came out as more of a croak. 3 more specialists. Different backgrounds, different expertise. We need to understand the full scope of human military creativity. Thrax clapped one massive hand on Vorthak's shoulder, nearly buckling his knees. This could revolutionize our approach to asymmetric warfare. Before Vorthak could formulate a response, the transport alarm chimed. The humans had arrived. Marcus Fletcher entered the briefing room first, looking annoyingly cheerful. Behind him came 3 other humans, each carrying what appeared to be simple civilian luggage. "Commander Vorthak!" Marcus waved enthusiastically. "I brought some friends." The first newcomer was a woman with graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She moved with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in her own skin. "Sarah Winters," she introduced herself, offering a handshake that could have crushed Vorthak's claws. "Retired engineer. Marcus said you were interested in improvised solutions." The second human was younger, maybe mid-20s, with the lean build of someone who spent considerable time outdoors. "Jake Morrison, wilderness survival instructor. I specialize in making useful things from, well, anything really." The third human was perhaps the most unsettling. Thomas Reed appeared to be in his 60s, with silver hair and the sort of calm, analytical gaze that suggested he had seen things that would traumatize lesser beings. "Military historian," he said simply. "I study how humans have killed each other throughout history." Vorthak felt his 3 eyes begin their familiar twitching pattern. "Wonderful," General Thrax rumbled. "Let's proceed to the advanced training facility." The advanced facility was 3 times larger than the basic training room, with more complex equipment and obstacles designed for senior-level tactical exercises. It also had reinforced walls rated for heavy weapons testing. Vorthak had a sinking feeling they would need that rating. Same parameters as before, General Thrax announced to the assembled group of alien cadets and human consultants. Create effective weapons using only materials available in this facility. 2 hours this time, given the increased complexity. "Oh, this should be fun," Sarah muttered, already examining the structural support beams with professional interest. Jake was testing the flexibility of various synthetic materials, bending and stretching them like he was evaluating rope quality. Meanwhile, Thomas had found a corner where he could observe the entire room while taking detailed notes. And Marcus? Marcus was grinning like someone who had just been handed the keys to a weapons manufacturing facility. "Right then," he announced. "Who wants to see what humans call a trebuchet?" 45 minutes later, Vorthak was seriously considering early retirement. Marcus and Sarah had somehow constructed a siege engine from exercise equipment, furniture, and what appeared to be the facility's entire supply of elastic resistance bands. The contraption stood nearly 15 feet tall and looked like it belonged in a museum of ancient warfare. "The physics are quite simple," Sarah explained to a crowd of fascinated cadets. "It's a counterweight system. You load the projectile here, winch down the throwing arm against the counterweight mass, and release. The energy transfer launches the projectile in a high arc." "How far?" asked Zilinia nervously. "Well, medieval humans could achieve ranges of up to 300 meters, with stone projectiles weighing 90 kilograms, Thomas replied, without looking up from his notes, though accuracy was always an issue with indirect fire weapons. "This one's smaller," Marcus admitted, "but the principle's the same." Sarah did the engineering calculations. Sarah nodded proudly. "Given the available materials and space constraints, I estimate a range of about 100 meters with a 5-kilogram projectile." "What projectile?" Vorthak asked, though he dreaded the answer. Jake stepped forward, holding what looked like a perfectly spherical metal object about the size of a child's head. "Gym equipment makes excellent ammunition. This is a condensed medicine ball core wrapped in structural foam and sealed with adhesive tape. Should hold together during flight and deliver substantial kinetic impact." Vorthak stared at the improvised cannonball. "You're planning to test this indoors?" "Oh, no," Marcus laughed. "Even we're not that crazy. Though if you wanted to test it in the outdoor training range—" "Absolutely not," Vorthak said quickly. "Fair enough. But Jake's been working on something more appropriate for enclosed spaces." Jake stepped forward, carrying what appeared to be a simple wooden staff about 6 feet long. Except on closer inspection, it wasn't quite that simple. "Quarterstaff," Thomas identified. "Classic European design, though Jake's added some modifications." Jake nodded. "The core is aluminum tubing from equipment framework, wrapped in padding from the exercise mats for grip and impact absorption. But here's the interesting bit. He twisted something at one end, and a wicked-looking metal point extended from the staff. Collapsible spearhead using a spring mechanism. Staff for non-lethal engagement. Spear for serious business." "And the other end?" Vorthak asked with morbid curiosity. Jake twisted the opposite end, revealing a different sort of metal head with multiple sharp edges. "Warhammer configuration, for dealing with armored opponents." Several alien cadets took instinctive steps backward. "The beauty of staff weapons," Thomas added conversationally, "is their versatility. Humans developed hundreds of variations across different cultures. Poleaxes, halberds, glaives, naginata, guandao." He paused. "Each designed for specific tactical situations." "How many of these can you make?" General Thrax asked, his 4 eyes gleaming with interest. "Given sufficient materials?" "As many as you need," Jake replied. though I'd recommend varying the designs based on the user's physiology and combat role. Vorthak's headache was reaching critical levels. What about you, Thomas? What's your contribution to this educational exercise? The older human smiled thinly. Oh, I'm not here to make weapons, Commander. I'm here to make strategy. He gestured to a section of the room where he had arranged furniture and equipment into what looked like a small fortress. Fortification, he explained. Humans learned very early that the best weapon is often a good defensive position. This is a basic strong point using available materials, overlapping fields of fire, multiple exit routes, supply storage, communication advantages. Communication? Harmony of 7 tones chimed nervously. Thomas pointed to a series of reflective surfaces positioned at strategic angles. Mirror system for silent signaling, plus acoustic amplifiers using curved surfaces to enhance hearing. He paused. And, of course, psychological warfare components. Psychological warfare? Vorthak repeated weakly. Oh yes, humans are quite good at that. For instance, those spear points Jake demonstrated? They're designed not just to penetrate armor, but to create maximum visual intimidation. The shape, the sound they make cutting through air, the way light reflects off the metal, all calculated to induce fear in opponents before actual combat begins. Thomas gestured toward Marcus's trebuchet. Similarly, siege engines serve as much psychological as tactical purposes. The sight of a massive weapon capable of hurling heavy projectiles tends to demoralize defenders even before the first shot is fired. The room had fallen completely silent except for the soft humming of environmental systems. Of course, Thomas continued, psychological warfare extends beyond weapon design into tactical deployment. Humans have developed quite sophisticated methods for inducing panic, confusion, and surrender in opposing forces without necessarily engaging in direct combat. Examples? General Thrax asked with obvious interest. Well, there's asymmetric harassment tactics, misinformation campaigns, false flag operations, economic warfare. Thomas shrugged. The goal is to make the enemy defeat themselves through their own reactions to perceived threats. Vorthak sat down heavily in the nearest chair. How many humans know these techniques? Strategy and tactics. Most human military personnel have basic training. Advanced psychological operations? Fewer, but still probably several million individuals with relevant experience. Million, Vorthak repeated faintly. Oh yes, humans have been fighting organized warfare for millennia. We've gotten quite good at it. Thomas's smile was thoroughly unsettling. Though most of us prefer peaceful solutions when possible. Most of us, squeaked Zilinia. Well, there are always a few who genuinely enjoy the intellectual challenge of warfare, Thomas admitted, but they usually go into military service or strategic gaming. Helpful for national defense, less helpful for dinner party conversation. Sarah had been quietly working on something throughout Thomas's lecture. Now she stood up, holding what appeared to be a complex mechanical device. Crossbow, she announced proudly. Self-loading mechanism using exercise equipment, springs, and a gear reduction system for the cocking mechanism. Much faster reload time than Marcus's traditional bow. She demonstrated by loading a bolt, apparently fashioned from more furniture components, and firing it into a target dummy. The projectile hit with tremendous force and precision. Rate of fire, approximately 1 shot every 3 seconds, she continued. Effective range similar to the bow, but requires less physical strength and training to operate effectively. You built that in an hour? Jex rumbled in amazement. 47 minutes, actually. The gear ratios were the tricky part. Sarah beamed with professional satisfaction. Though I did cheat a bit by using Jake's spear points for the bolts. Vorthak looked around the training facility. In 2 hours, 4 humans had transformed a room full of exercise equipment and furniture into what appeared to be a medieval armory. Siege engines, pole arms, crossbows, fortifications, and probably half a dozen other weapons he hadn't even noticed yet. "Questions," General Thrax boomed, apparently delighted by the entire display. Harmony of 7 tones chimed hesitantly. "How many other human activities involve learning to make weapons?" "Oh, that's hard to quantify," Marcus replied thoughtfully. "Engineering involves understanding structural mechanics that translate to weapon design. Carpentry and metalworking provide fabrication skills. Chemistry classes cover explosive reactions. Physics education includes ballistics and energy transfer principles. Hunting teaches marksmanship and tracking," Jake added. "Camping and hiking develop fieldcraft and survival skills. Historical study provides tactical knowledge and strategic thinking," Thomas continued. "Sports develop physical conditioning and competitive psychology. Art and sculpture teach precision handling of tools," Sarah finished. "Really, most human education and recreation has some military applications if you think about it creatively." Vorthak's vision was starting to blur around the edges. "The thing is," Marcus said conversationally, "humans don't usually think of these as military skills. They're just life skills. Things you learn growing up on Earth." "Because Earth is hostile environment, yes?" Jex asked. "Well, that's part of it," Jake acknowledged. "But mostly it's because humans are naturally curious and competitive. We like to figure out how things work, then figure out how to do them better. And apply what we learn to new situations," Sarah added. "Engineering principles are universal. If you understand leverage, you can build a catapult or a nutcracker with equal success. Plus," Thomas concluded, "humans have excellent pattern recognition and adaptive thinking. We're very good at seeing connections between seemingly unrelated concepts." The alien cadets exchanged nervous glances. "Final question," Vorthak said weakly. "In your professional assessment, how dangerous are humans compared to other Galactic Federation species?" The 4 humans looked at each other thoughtfully. "Well," Marcus said slowly, "I suppose that depends on circumstances. Most humans prefer peaceful cooperation when possible. But," Jake added, "we're extremely good at violence when necessary. 10,000 years of constant warfare does tend to refine one's techniques. And we're very difficult to predict or counter," Sarah noted. "Most species develop standardized approaches to problems. Humans improvise. The real issue," Thomas concluded, "is that humans don't typically think like soldiers. We think like engineers, artists, teachers, farmers, and then apply that diverse knowledge to military problems. It creates very unconventional solutions." General Thrax was furiously taking notes. "Fascinating! This explains the reports from the frontier colonies." "What reports?" Vorthak asked, though he was increasingly certain he didn't want to know. "Human settlers dealing with hostile native fauna, using improvised solutions. Apparently, they've been remarkably successful at defending their colonies with minimal official military support." "Define minimal," Thomas requested. "No energy weapons, no heavy equipment, no orbital support. Just basic colonist supplies and whatever they could manufacture locally." The 4 humans exchanged glances again. "Oh dear," Sarah murmured. "I suspect those colonists have been having entirely too much fun with their local defense preparations." "Fun?" Vorthak croaked. "Humans enjoy technical challenges," Marcus explained. "Tell us we have to defend a settlement using only local resources, and we'll treat it like the galaxy's most interesting puzzle. With potentially explosive results, Jake added cheerfully. Both literally and figuratively, Thomas concluded, with that unsettling smile. Vorthak stood up abruptly. I need to file a report immediately. As he hurried toward the exit, he heard General Thrax call out behind him. Excellent work, Commander. I'm recommending these humans for permanent consulting positions. The last thing Vorthak heard before the door closed was Marcus saying, Oh, that's wonderful. Wait until you meet my cousin Danny. He builds rockets for fun. 3 hours later, Vorthak sat in his office, staring at a half-completed incident report that would probably trigger a galaxy-wide reassessment of human capabilities. His 3 eyes had stopped twitching and progressed to a full nervous twitch that affected his entire head. On his desk sat a formal request from the Federation Council for a comprehensive evaluation of human military potential. Attached was a note from General Thrax expressing his enthusiasm for expanding the human consultant program. There was also a message from Marcus Fletcher, cheerfully offering to arrange visits from additional human specialists. Apparently, he had friends who were expert in siege warfare, naval tactics, aerial combat, biochemical applications, and something called urban pacification techniques. Vorthak deleted that message without responding. Instead, he began composing a different sort of report, one that would strongly recommend classifying humans as a friendly but unpredictable species, with appropriate diplomatic protocols to ensure they remained friendly. Because after witnessing what 4 humans could accomplish with furniture and exercise equipment, Vorthak had absolutely no desire to see what they might do if they became unfriendly. Outside his office window, he could see the outdoor training range where the human-built trebuchet was being prepared for testing. A crowd of alien cadets and instructors had gathered to watch the demonstration. Vorthak closed his blinds and reached for the strongest pain medication in his medical kit. Some things were better experienced secondhand through official reports. Much safer that way.